Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Barry Jones with SP History, continuing our series on the formation of the deep state. And today we're going to see an incredibly ironic development take place with the entrance of the United States into World War I. We've reached World War I now. And of course, when we left off in chapter 9, the United States is not in the war, it's a European war, but we have a rooting interest. And so we have a side that we prefer win this war because we have long-term relationships with the countries that are on that side, specifically the Allies, specifically England. We have a quote special relationship with England. And and of course, France is on their side and Russia as well. So we are rooting for them, the Allies. But remember now, Woodrow Wilson ran for president based on the campaign promise that he would keep us out of this war. He has already violated a campaign promise that he would never use military intervention. He's used it in Haiti and Mexico when he was informed that those are American interests and you will do what is necessary to protect American interests, even up to and including using the military. It doesn't matter what you said in the campaign. That's just talk. You're president now. You have to act like it. So he's being directed around by his nose by these power elites who were there before he became president, will be there during his time as president, and will still be there after he is president. So they are in charge. So now the issue is World War I. And of course, we are a nation of immigrants. And so there are people who have immigrated to the United States from both sides, whose roots go back to the to Germany, to Austria-Hungary, to Italy, but also to England, to France, and perhaps even Russia. So we have a unique situation in America where we have divided loyalties. It was estimated at that time a third of all Americans were foreign born. I don't mean they had grandpas and grandmas that were foreign born. They themselves were foreign born. So the roots are still very deep. There's a lot of American citizens that have loyalties to both sides. Now, we tended to lean more, as far as our sympathies were concerned, to the Allies, but that doesn't diminish the fact that we had a lot of American citizens who were sympathetic to the other side. So if you're the president, you're trying to manage this, it'd be a nightmare to choose a side and alienate a sizable portion of your constituency. So Wilson's going to urge the Americans to stay neutral during this. And of course, this is not because he's not interested. He is extremely interested. In fact, we're going to find out he's what we call an internationalist. He thinks we should have some role because he's thinking about what comes next, the peace deal. And if we are not involved in some manner, shape, or form, we're going to get left out of the peace deal when it's all said and done. And American interests won't be represented. We won't have a seat at the table. So he's not saying stay neutral, stay out of it, let's be isolationists. He's saying we don't want to take a side, be obvious about it because A, that's tricky just in and of itself. It jeopardizes relationships with other countries, but it also is tricky here at home domestically because we got a lot of people here at home that are from different parts of the world represented by this war. So his concern is that we stay neutral. Um, here is here are the three categories of people with respect to what we should do in World War One. You had the old guard, the isolationists, who say the war is not our business, it's a European war, we should stay out. These are folks that come from the George Washington School of Foreign Policy, right? Uh, Beware of foreign entanglements. It served us well for the first 100 years of our existence, staying out of foreign issues. That's a distinct minority of the population now. We have, since the Civil War, found ourselves immersed in foreign affairs almost constantly. starting with our first foreign war, the Spanish-American War, from which we got a bunch of goodies that benefited the corporate America tremendously. From that, we went on this imperialist drive to establish relationships with China, trade, Japan, India. We've established spheres of influence in Latin America and the Far East. We've dug a canal through Panama. We have gotten very busy very quickly involving ourselves in foreign affairs. And we've built our military. We've got bases in Guantanamo and in the Philippines now to protect our interests. In other words, we're too far down that road. And to go back to the isolationist past, a large majority of the American people don't support that. But then on the flip side, you got interventionists who say we should get in the war. The war is our business because it involves American interests. It involves allies, trading partners, etc. So we should get in. So you've got that divide. And then you have the Wilson camp, the internationalists, who say we should play a role, perhaps diplomatically, perhaps through trade or boycotting of trade, but not militarily necessarily. Our role should be when the war is over, we should be the ones who broker the peace. That way we ensure that our interests are taken into consideration. So pretty much every angle is covered. Most Americans fall into one of these three categories. Now, I started off today saying that it's going to be an incredible irony, the way we get into this war. Now, I want to review real quick how we transitioned from treachery to treason in the lead up to the Spanish-American War. If you recall, there were three methods that were used in a psyop against the American people. Because remember now, the power elites behind the scene, the unelected, the unaccountable power elites, the heads of these corporations want us to get into this war because they want, like we took Hawaii, they want to take Cuba. They want the Philippines so we can put a base to defend or control, monitor, and even expand our trade in the Far East. It's all upside to them. There's no downside. There's no risk of us losing to Spain. And so, and indeed, it played out that way, the splendid little war. The problem was it's our first foreign war. We're violating 100 years of isolationism. Somehow we got to convince the American people to go along with it. So there were the three methods that were used as we transition from treachery to treason. And, treachery is when you betray people, when you deceive people for your own benefit. Treason is when you betray your country. People die as a result, or you overthrow your own government, or you kill your leader. So it's clear people died as a result of the Spanish-American War, especially in the lead up to it. And it was all sold to American people under false pretenses. The first step in the method was to propagandize the American people through the yellow press. Okay. The second step was to manufacture evidence, a fake letter from the Spanish ambassador, which insulted our president, which immediately raised the jingoistic ire of the American people. And the third was a false flag attack, sinking our own ship in Havana Harbor and blaming the Spanish for it. Each time sufficiently primed the pump a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. By the time that ship got sunk, the American people had been worked up into such a state that they were ready to go support this foreign war. And in their view, the Spaniards were less than human people who committed all these atrocities against the Cuban people, against the Filipinos. Ironically, we later committed the same atrocities at even greater to greater degrees, especially against the Filipino people during the insurrection. Anyway, those were the three methods: propaganda, manufacture of evidence, and false flag. Okay. And of course, the false flag involved the sinking of a ship. The manufacturing of the evidence involved a fake letter, communication, and of course, propaganda. I want you to remember that because everything we learned about intelligence or foreign policy or diplomacy or even modern warfare, everything we've learned historically has come from the British. I mean, I remember when after World War II and we shut down the OSS, we created the CIA. We went and learned at the British feet from their intelligence services how to operate a CIA. Everything we know, they taught us. They have been our teachers. And what I want you to observe in the lead up to our involvement in World War One is how the master gets one over on the pupil. And you can the methods are all the same, exactly the same. All right, little backstory before we get to that. International law, which before World War One, people didn't even know, weren't familiar with international law because there had been no world war. There had been no very few wars on the seas involving countries from all around the world. But now all of a sudden it's appropriate. It applies. And well, international law, part one, there's part one, there's part two. Part one allows for the seizure of contraband. Contraband is specified according to international law as items used for the purposes of war. So it would be weapons and other items, ammunition, et cetera, et cetera. So you can stop ships, you can seize the contraband from those ships, but you could only seize the contraband. You couldn't seize, for example, medical supplies or food that was meant for the general population. That's just some background information you need to be aware of as we proceed through this. But the British, having the world's long acknowledged to be the world's greatest navy, right? That's their advantage, is their navy. So the British used its navy to stop ships headed for Germany, and they were confiscating contraband and non-contraband. In other words, they were violating international law. They were seizing food, medical supplies, and they had formed a blockade prohibiting any ship from entering or exiting the ports into Germany. And so they were literally starving Germany into submission. That was the point. But they were, in doing so, they were violating international law. Okay, we'll start there. The second part of international law said that if a sub, it applied to submarines, which the Germans were the only navy at the time that had subs. The Germans could not afford to build a big ocean navy like the English had, so they found a counteract to the British Navy, and it was submarines. And they were cheap, and they were stealthy, and you could wreak havoc on a traditional navy with these subs because the technology hadn't caught up. There was no sonar, right, or radar, or anything of that nature. You couldn't even see them. By the time you did see them, it was too late. They'd already attacked you. But according to international law, it required subs to do two things before sinking an unarmed ship. They had to A, provide warning, and B, provide safety for the passengers. And this was viewed by the Germans as an unfair advantage for the British because the British had a navy that could sink ships. They could provide warning and safety for the passengers by offboarding all these people onto this traditional ship, but there's no way you can do that with a sub. If you come to the surface and you provide warning, those subs were pretty leaky. They were notoriously flimsy, and a depth charge in the general direction or general vicinity of a sub would sink it. So if you come to the surface, you're essentially signing your death warrant. You cannot come to the surface and provide warning. B, you cannot provide safety for the passengers. Subs were too small. You couldn't offboard all those passengers onto your sub. So the German contention was the international law had been written to favor the British Navy. They could provide warning. They could provide safety. And the subs couldn't do either one. And they said, furthermore, to comply with international law, the British are not supposed to be blockading our ports and seizing food and medical supplies. And since they are, and you guys aren't doing anything about it, we're going to sink all of the British ships. Any ship coming and going to England, it's fair game. They announced it to the world. They said any ship coming and going to Britain, we're going to assume has contraband on it. We can't come to the surface and give notice or warning, and we certainly can't offboard uh, the passengers. So we're telling you now, this is your warning. If you are on a ship that's going to England or leaving England, either one, you are subject to be sunk by one of our subs. And we are not going to offboard you onto our sub. You're going to sink to the bottom of the ocean. So it was unrestricted sub warfare is what it was. And the British cried foul. They said they're breaking international law. And the Germans says, well, you're breaking international law because you're seizing more than contraband. You're blockading our ports, preventing food and medical supplies. You're making war against the German population. And this law that favors you to begin with, we don't recognize because it was written when before such time as there were any subs even in existence. So it doesn't take into account this new kind of warfare. So we have a dispute here. And especially what the Allies start doing is trying to trick the Germans by smuggling contraband on passenger ships. So they began, just these big passenger ships that are clearly not warships headed for England. In the hull of the ship, they'd put war materials, contraband. And if the ship got sunk, the public relations nightmare would fall squarely on Germany for sinking an unarmed passenger ship. Well, the Germans knew through their spy network that these passenger ships were loaded down with contraband. So, yes, technically they're violating international law by sinking unarmed passenger ships, but so are the British, so are the Allies by sneaking on contraband and flying these ships under neutral flags. So both sides but see, we're getting one side of the story. And one side of the story is that the Germans are the ones breaking the law. They're running around pell-mell in the Atlantic, sinking all of these unarmed passenger ships that are from neutral countries. They're not even involved in the war. They're just sinking. And it made them look like they were just indiscriminately sinking everybody. Well, the Germans were not indiscriminately sinking everybody. They were sinking everybody headed for England. And they had warned the world that they would do this. And they could not provide warning because they were on subs. And so they had warned the world that this was going to happen. And of course, the Allies were sneaking on this contraband. And the Allies, the British specifically, were blockading German ports, making war against the German population by preventing not just contraband, but also medical supplies and food. But we're only getting one side of the story. And here's this yellow press again. Now, you can't lay the blame squarely on the yellow press in America because we are reporting what we know. And the reason we're only getting one side of the story is because one of the first things the British did when they determined early in the war they wanted to get the United States involved on their side is they cut the transatlantic cable. The transatlantic cable is a cable at the bottom of the ocean that gave updates and news and whatever from Europe to the United States. And when the British cut the transatlantic cable, we were on a news blackout from Europe. We didn't know what the other side of the story was because we couldn't get that information. The only information we got was filtered through Britain. In other words, Britain became the clearinghouse for all news that would be shared with the United States. So just like in the lead up to the Spanish-American War, the Yellow Press only reported the atrocities of the Spanish and shaded all their news coverage to implicate Spain in everything bad that was happening around the world. So too, the British were shading or filtering out the German side of this equation and presenting to the Americans only the British side, which was to say the Germans are sinking ships, unarmed passengers are going to the bottom. These are neutral ships flying under neutral flags, and they're not providing warning. And so they're reporting that the Germans are violating indiscriminately international law, while withholding from the American side that they too are violating international law. But because they control the info that's flooding into America, because they cut the transatlantic cable, the Americans don't know what they don't know. In other words, this is where the irony is. The scam that the American government and these power elites foisted upon the American people to get us involved in the Spanish-American War is now being run on us. The British are running an operation on the Americans to drag us into this war, whether we like it or not. And you're going to see some of the exact same methods employed. One of the sort of the line that got crossed that was couldn't once we passed it, there was no going back, was when the Lusitania went down. The Lusitania was kind of like the Titanic. It was a big passenger ship, British, and it went back and forth between Europe, America, between England and the United States. And in one particular trip, as it was heading out to sea, right off the coast of Ireland, the German U-boat sunk it. And it happened to be that there were hundreds of Americans on board, and the ship gets sunk. Now, understand, the Lusitania was a passenger ship, but like all the other passenger ships that had already been sunk, it too was at risk. It claimed to be an unarmed passenger ship. The Germans contended at the time that the hull was full of contraband. Of course, the British denied it. We didn't find out till years later when they went to the crash site, went down to the bottom of the ocean. They found, just like the Germans said, there was contraband that was among all the wreckage at the bottom of the ocean. But of course, you don't know that at the time. The Germans suspected it. They seemed to know, but the British denied it. But the British had been denying all along that any of the contraband was on any of these unarmed passenger ships. So why would the Lusitania be any different? It's the biggest of all these passenger ships. You could tote a lot of contraband on that ship. Anyway, the fact that hundreds of Americans were sacrificed was the tipping point in America. Americans who were isolationists or internationalists and didn't want to get involved until the end of the war, all of a sudden, American blood had been spilled. And so the British, who taught us all of these tactics that we employed to get us into the Spanish-American War, are now using those same tactics against us. And they intentionally sent into harm's way a passenger ship that when it was sunk, they knew it was going to be sunk. When it was sunk, it just so happened to be a passenger ship with hundreds of Americans on it. The target is America. The target is the goal is to get Americans to flip from not supporting American involvement in the war to supporting American involvement in war. It's not lost on them that the USS Maine cost 266 American lives and convinced Americans to support the Spanish-American War. If a few hundred Americans have to be the price tag to get America to join World War I, so be it. It's a price worth paying. And especially if you can blame the Germans, especially if you can say, well, it was the German U-boats. They've been breaking international law. This is another case. This is a very prominent example. And maybe this will be enough to drag the Americans into the war. I believe 100% that the British intentionally sent this ship. They waited for a ship that would be loaded down with Americans. They intentionally sent it into harm's way. It was loaded down with contraband, knowing full well the Germans would sink it, which they did. Knowing full well, since they control all the information coming back to America, they can shape the story the way they want, blame the Germans for the sinking of the ship, even though they sent it into harm's way intentionally. And the result will be, this is essentially a false flag. The Germans did their part, but the British laid out this, created the setting, the scenario, and literally walked that ship right into a trap, hoping that the Germans would sink it, because they knew the outcry in America over American blood being spilt at sea, over Americans dying, and we're not even in the war, would cause Americans to support the war, American involvement in the war. In other words, here we are repeating, we're not doing it. It's being done to us. The same tactics that we used against the American people, the treason that we used against the American people to change their non-support of the Spanish-American War to support for the Spanish-American War is now being run against us. First, propaganda. They cut the transatlantic cable. Second, a false flag involving a ship and hundreds of Americans dying. But it doesn't stop there. There's going to be a third, and I'm going to skip ahead and I'll come back to that last slide. It's the Zimmerman note. Now, understand that this still to this day is contested. A lot of people, historians, believe that this was legitimate, that it actually happened. Remember now, we're getting all our information from Britain. And then there's another group of people who believe that this was contrived, just like the Spanish ambassador letter that got everybody upset before the Spanish-American War. This happened to be the German foreign minister. Just substitute the German foreign minister for the Spanish ambassador. Allegedly sent a telegram to Mexico, and in this telegram, he asked Mexico's help in defeating the United States. In other words, this is Germany proposing an expansion of the war to include the United States. And if Mexico will help them in exchange after they win, Mexico will get Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back. Now, notice who intercepts this telegram: the British. And of course, they can't wait to release this publicly. And the American people are just infuriated. So you have the propaganda, which primes the pump. All the news we're getting from Europe, it's actually from Britain, is about all the atrocities the Germans are committing, conveniently leaving out all the atrocities and the violations of international law that are happening at the hands of the British. So we're getting one side of the equation. It's the equivalent of yellow press. It's the equivalent of propaganda. We're being fed a line, all right? And they're just priming that pump, and we're creeping along. The support for our involvement in the war is creeping up, creeping up, creeping up. Then they send that ship, the Lusitania, into harm's way. Boom, hundreds of Americans dead. All the news comes from Britain about how it was an unarmed ship. These were innocent passengers. They all died. And this was another violation, another example of a violation of international law by the Germans. Now it's not American support for our involvement in the war is not creeping. Now it's big leaps are happening, and we're rapidly approaching the tipping point. And then just for good measure, they manufacture this evidence. Okay, you could say, if you want to be given the benefit of the doubt and say the German minister actually wrote this, then it'd be the stupidest move by the Germans. In the annals of stupid moves, this would be the stupidest. To put anything on paper that would bring into the equation a country like the United States against you in a war. I mean, you talk about a stupid move. More likely, this was another one of these manufactured pieces of evidence. Of course, it was filtered through the British, as it always was during this period, to the Americans. We never got our hands on it. We never got to physically touch it or see it. It was never produced, kind of like the Spanish ambassador letter. It's just reported that it happened. And that became the tipping point to get the Americans to support the war. So just like in the Spanish-American War, where our government, with the help of these elites and a friendly yellow press, propagandized the American people, manufactured a fake letter from the Spanish ambassador insulting our president, and then sunk one of our own ships in a false flag. Here we are, spinning ahead to World War I. The British now are propagandizing the American people after they cut the transatlantic cable. We're only getting their side of the story. Then they manufacture this Zimmerman note where we never get to see it. It's just reported from the British that this is what the German foreign minister said. And then they send the ship into harm's way. It's the equivalent of a false flag. It goes down, and hundreds of Americans are dead. What do you think's going to? It's the same methods. This is why we fight so hard. The CIA goes to court, the government goes to court, and they classify everything. They don't want to declassify because they said it will reveal methods and sources. The key one there is methods. We use the same methods over and over and over again, and we can't reveal those methods to the American people because not only would it foreclose on using them in the future, it would reveal that we've used them in the past. So we got to protect those methods at all costs. So here is the master giving the pupil a lesson in the same methods that we've already used to get ourselves in the Spanish-American War, and it works. Uh, Immediately, we passed the National Defense Act to begin this period of preparedness. Naval Constitution Act, ordering the building of more warships, expanding the size of the Army. In other words, we are quickly on the march towards declaring a side. We've secretly been supporting the Allied side. Now we're going to have to declare. On April 6, 1917, Congress declares war. The European war is now a world war. And so I hate to say game, but this game that the British ran on the American people, on the United States, the only question is whether or not the American government was aware that this was being run, or if the American government was complicit. In other words, aware that this was being done and supportive of it because their goal was to eventually get into the war. Either they're going to have to commit treason again against their own people, like they did in the Spanish-American War, or if the British could do it for us, then they have plausible deniability for the rest of the time. So the question I have, I it's really not a question in my mind. I've seen this too many times where the Americans work in concert with the country. In other words, you'll see it again in World War II. The same deal. Churchill's begging for the United States to get involved in World War II. And Roosevelt's like, I can't. My people don't support it. You're going to have to help me get my people to support this war if you want me to jump in. I can't just unilaterally make that decision. Congress will never vote to declare war based on what the public opinion in America is right now. You're going to have to help me. Either that or I'm going to have to commit treason against my own people. So if whether so what I believe happened was, and I can't prove this, but I believe the United States knew, the government, the head honchos, they knew, the power elites, for example, our closest, we have this special relationship with Britain. Britain in World War I and again in World War II is begging for the United States to jump into the war on their side. Everybody knows the Russians are about ready to drop out. The Allies are at risk of losing. We cannot allow the Allies to lose. It's reaching the point of desperation. The Americans have to join at this moment to offset the loss of the Russians. And this method is tried and true. It's already worked once. The propaganda, the manufacture of evidence, and the false flag. It's already worked once. Now, whether or not we do it against our own people or one of our potential allies does it for us, the result or the outcome is the same. Because remember, they control all the information. So all we know is what they're telling us. It's all being filtered through Britain. So it's all with an anti-German slant. And you start to see it in the public square in America, everything German. People start, you know, discriminating against anything German. They, it becomes a pejorative word or a pejorative idea or identification to be German or to have been from Germany or to have any kind of German affiliation. People are ashamed of it because we're being barraged on a daily basis with this anti-German propaganda, which is coming from Britain. But I believe our government was fully aware of it and helping it along, saying, okay, we know what you're doing. We know when you cut the transatlantic cable why you did it. But the American people don't need to know that you cut the transatlantic cable, and we won't tell them. And all this information that we put in our newspapers and that we tell them, we won't tell them it's coming from you. And we'll just spoon feed them all this propaganda. They'll find out years later that you cut the transatlantic cable, but they don't need to know that now because that might impact whether or not this information is believable. We're just going to feed them like with a spoon, this propaganda. And when you send this ship into harm's way and all these Americans die, I mean, Why would the American government have any problem with that? They've already proven they would do it themselves in Havana, Cuba. The manufacture of evidence, we did it ourselves. Why would we care if they do it? The end result, the objective, when you're solving a crime, you look at motive, means, and opportunity, right? What's the motive? The motive here is to get the United States into the war on the Allied side before they lose, especially because Russia's about to drop out. That's not just the British wanting the Americans to join. That's the Americans wanting to join the higher ups, the power elites, to preserve the Allied side, to preserve this special relationship with England, because that's our side. We haven't declared it, but we're supporting that side. We're trading with England, right? So that's the motive, to preserve the Allies. Do we have are the means available to us? We've already proven that we could run this kind of an operation, this sort of treasonous psyop against the American people. We've already done it once. If we've done it, that means we're okay with it. Whether we do it or Britain does it for us, we're okay with the general idea. And the fact that the transatlantic cable has been cut gives Britain the means by which to control the propaganda coming into America. The fact that this is a British ship, they control it, gives Britain the means to intentionally send that ship into harm's way and allow Germany to sink it. The Zimmerman note, the British have the means, because they control the information, to tell America that they intercepted this note, and here are the details of that note. So you have motive, you have means, and of course you have opportunity. You're in a war, and all the tensions are on high alert. Everyone's, the opportunity to propagandize the American people is made possible by the cutting of that cable. The opportunity to sink that ship is made possible because the Atlantic's full of German subs, and they know it. The opportunity to fake a letter is just too good to pass up, because the Americans aren't getting any news from Europe that hasn't first been filtered through Britain. You can basically tell the Americans anything you want. So the motive, the means, and the opportunity are there. And of course, because of our special relationship with Britain, is it that far-fetched to believe that our government was aware in advance of what Britain was doing and was permitting it to happen because they too were intent on getting into this war? They just needed justification, or they just needed popular support. And whether we do it or they do it, the end result is the same: war. And now we are involved in what they call the war to end all wars, so that in the end, when this is all over, we can have a seat at the table at the peace treaty and help negotiate the future of the world. We can't be left out of that conference. We have to be there. And the only way you can be there is to have been involved in the war in some manner, shape, form. And so the outcome is what the outcome is. It's kind of like when I talk to people about the difference between Watergate and the JFK assassination. It's different means, but the end result is the same. It's an overthrow of the government. In Kennedy's case, they shot and killed him and overthrew the government that way. In Nixon's case, the CIA set him up and got him, basically forced him into a resignation. He was backed into a corner, didn't have any choice. They used their assets in the media. They used their assets in Congress. They used their assets in the judicial system, and they pushed him into a corner. He didn't have any choice. And then who was his replacement? Just like in JFK's case, the replacement was LBJ, who was going to give them the war in Vietnam that they wanted. Who was the replacement for Nixon? Ford. Who was Ford? Ford was the guy who sat on the Warren Commission, helped cover up everything that happened in 63. Why would he not cover up what happened in 72 or 74? And what's the first thing he does? Exactly 30 days after he becomes president, he pardons Nixon, and the cover up is complete. So what you learn about these methods is that sometimes it happens in different forms. Sometimes it's an assassination. Sometimes it's an impeachment proceeding. But the end result is the same. You set it up so the successor is going to do what you want. You wanted that Vietnam War, you got it. You wanted the Cold War to continue. Nixon was trying to end it. You got it. And then you make sure that the perpetrators walk away unscathed. How do you do that? You rig the investigation. You rig the Warren Commission. You kill the patsy so he can never go to trial. Trials are unpredictable. So you just kill Lee Harvey Oswald. In Nixon's case, you pardon Nixon so there's no trial, whether civil or criminal. It's the same. The end result's the same. And here you see the end result are the same. In the Spanish-American War, the power elites wanted that war desperately. They wanted to set the course, a new course for America, whereby instead of being isolationists, we were interventionists all around the world. We're creating these spheres of influence, getting access to raw materials, getting access to markets, getting access to territories, getting access to military bases. And because of social Darwinism, their thing was, well, if we don't do it, somebody else will. Well, here we are, spin it forward to World War I. What's the goal? We want to get in World War I. Why? Not necessarily because we care about the the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand. We couldn't give a fat flying fig about that, but we care very deeply about how that peace treaty is going to go after the war. We know the maps are going to be redrawn. We now have interests to protect around the world. We need to have a seat at that table. We have to be in that war. American people aren't going to support us getting involved in a European war unless they're helped. And just like we helped them along, committed treason against our own people to convince them to change their minds, support that war, they're going to have to be helped along this time, whether it's by us or by our chief ally, our chief beneficiary, the country that's going to benefit the most by our jumping in on their side. Doesn't matter who does it, just has to get done. And so that's how we got into World War I. Spanish-American War was treason against our own people by our own government. World entrance into World War II was treason against America by a foreign country in complicity, in conjunction with, in cooperation with our government. So essentially, it's treason again against our own people because our government blessed it and went along with it. Okay, that's enough for today. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to my channel if you think about it, if you're interested. Smash the like button. Share my channel with others if you think they'd be interested, and or comment. Feel free to comment. Encourage that, certainly. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.